Welcome to another LibertyFest interview. I'm Dave Pellowe and joining me is Jacinta Price. Now, are you currently an elected councillor?
Yes.
Of Alice Springs?
Alice Springs Town Council.
Alice Springs Town Council. What's the population of the council? The local government area?
Yeah, so our constituency consists of, I think we've just dropped to about 27,400.
Okay.
Off the top of my head. Recently.
That's a big town. Not quite a city.
No, not quite a city. A nice size, actually.
Yeah. The town I grew up in, or finished school in, I've been talking about some of the smaller towns I lived in with you, but 15 was in the Shire, 15,000.
Yeah.
10,000 in town itself.
Yeah.
Nice little farming community. Yeah, nice size.
Yeah.
So tell me about the taboo of talking about the violence in remote Indigenous communities. Is it only remote, or is it even in the city Indigenous communities?
I think it's in the wider community as well. I think it's even more so in smaller communities because of traditional aspects, traditional cultural aspects. Traditionally, for example, there are very, stringent sort of ways that relationships are set out, kin relationships, and like your mother-in-law and a son-in-law are supposed to completely, they're not even allowed to share the same room space as one another. Total avoidance is considered utmost respect.
Is that for a cup of tea or just for overnight?
That's in any circumstances whatsoever. My belief is...
So your husband and your mum aren't allowed to be in the same room?
Yeah, they are, because, my husband's Scottish.
Okay.
He's not Wartbury. My mother's, been able to adapt to other ways of doing things, although sometimes she does struggle a little bit, being too close to him, or, in some conversations that she find, I guess, may lead to an argument, she'll probably go through me.
Wow.
And so this idea of avoidance, one, is supposed to be about showing complete respect, but two,
for each other or for the elder? Yeah,
the two most likely people to fight are probably a mother-in-law and son-in-law.
Right.
There are other relationships where that's the case as well. But I think the idea of avoiding that is to avoid conflict. And avoiding conflict often means just saying what people want to hear as opposed to speaking the truth as well. Mm-hmm. So there's that underlying aspect which is, embedded in culture that's going on about ways of avoiding conflict is to, step around the truth, not engage with it, not speak up. You're not supposed to. The only time you ever really speak openly about things is usually if you're angry and you are wanting to be confrontational about an issue. So you tend not to go down that particular path unless you want, you want to fight on your hands. So there's that aspect, and there's also, it's about, I guess, keeping peace to a degree. So, for some examples in some communities, in the top end, there was a case where there was a young girl who had been, she'd been raped by a man in the community, and in order to find some sort of peaceful way to maneuver through it, they blamed the girl for what had happened. And, because, a young girl's not going to speak out, she's not going to cause a fuss, she's in terms of status, she's on the bottom.
Powerless,
exactly. So there's, instances like that occur. So to speak out about issues relating to family violence, you're going to piss a lot of people off. And also because everyone's related. Like, I'm related to perpetrators, I'm also related to the victims. People don't like being told when they're doing something wrong. And I think these are things that we need to really overcome, particularly for victims in small communities, because quite often if a victim speaks out, then the family will have a go at them and defend the perpetrator. So if you live in a small community and if there's fear of retaliation from a perpetrator's family, well, then you'll usually remain silent and you won't speak out against it. So there's all these things that are going on and they need to change. And part of that does resonate through urban Aboriginal communities as well. I think, there's a case where a man in New South Wales had been brought before the court because he had sexually abused a young girl over many years. But his supporters came to court and yelled down at the supporters of the young girl who was the victim in that case. So we're seeing that go on, and that's permeated into into different levels of where Aboriginal people are involved in terms of power to men that have worked their way up and are in quite prominent positions.
Is that a symptom of cultural immaturity in that one area?
I think it's definitely a symptom of culture that hasn't really evolved and moved forward. It's also, I think, a symptom of men attempting to use culture as an excuse as well to get away with certain behaviours. I've talked about a case up in the top end where it was only a few years ago that the defence for a man who had taken a 15-year-old who was his promised wife and raped her and held her captive on his outstation. His defence argued that he was acting within the parameters of his traditional law, and she should have known as the promised wife that she, what her responsibilities as a promised wife were. She's 15. In Western law, that's called rape of a minor.
Yeah.
And so there have been instances where the legal system have tried to support Aboriginal men in these cases, but I think that was, one of the last reported cases where that could no longer stand. There was an outcry after a lenient sort of sentence. I think it was 24 hours imprisonment for what was dropped down to, instead of rape, a rape charge was unlawful intercourse with a minor. And then there was another 14-day, he was in prison for 14 days for having a firearm offence. So that was, considered worse than actually raping a 15-year-old girl. So there was public outcry. Yeah. So that was then, that case was then reviewed following that, because it just,
Now, you cop a heap of flack for saying that that's an area of your culture that needs to evolve.
Yes.
And you described as someone who hates your culture by lefties. Horrible names that don't articulate it nicely. But that's like getting angry at the lifeguard because he's worried about you not swimming in safety, isn't it?
Pretty much. And usually I'm attacked by those who don't understand traditional culture, who are removed from it, who romanticize it because they are lacking it themselves and are trying to cling on to this romantic view of culture because of their own, identity and their own insecurities about their identity.
So you're talking about Aboriginals who don't understand Aboriginal culture, or Westerners?
Yes, people of Aboriginal descent who don't understand it, and of course their supporters who are, Westerners who belong to the extreme left, who often target me because, I've been told so many times that why is it you try to bring your own people down, and why is it that you're a sellout and this, that and the other? Well, actually I'm not bringing my own people down, and those you regard as my own people are in fact not my own people. Not everyone is my own people. My own people are who I speak on behalf of. I never claim to speak on behalf of any other people but my own people, and those who come to me who are victims, who have been victims, who say please keep speaking, because they themselves have been through so much trauma. If they were to stand up and say the things I have, well, the same would be, same would happen to them, and yet they've been through so much already.
I'd love to see a lot I'd love to get a lot better understanding of Aboriginal culture, especially that which is common between all the different people groups in Australia. Yeah. You know, obviously there's going to be differences because there's lots of different dialects and I don't know what the right word is for it, but groups.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like talking another language. Any given experience seems black and white, no pun intended, but it can actually be a completely different spectrum of colour. Yes. And interpreted differently, such as, you know, this mother-in-law husband, you know, kind of like that's just something I wouldn't imagine had any kind of relation. But one of the things I think everybody needs to get over, and Australians generally, is this cultural relativism, where in the name of multiculturalism, you can do anything that anybody else could consider immoral, unethical, and really, really uncivilized in the name of culture. Like culture's this blank check.
That's right.
To poor character.
That's right, and it's failing the human rights of the most vulnerable people in this country. You know, their human rights are disregarded simply because of the fact that culture apparently trumps human rights. You know, we see it also with Muslim women as well. You know, I see a lot of parallels between what they go through and what Aboriginal women go through because we're both, you know, part of patriarchal societies.
I hate that word. But sometimes it just fits.
That's right. I think they're the only context where it does actually fit. You know, and there's this myth that's pushed by a lot of Indigenous people again who have this romanticised view of Aboriginal culture that we're a matriarchal society. We're not. And you know, traditionally women have played a very strong role in the background, but when it comes to the bottom line of things, you know, men are always seen to be...
That's pretty common with most older cultures.
It is. And again, it's about being able to evolve past that once again. And I think some people think...
There's this classic line from My Big Fat Greek Wedding where the mother-in-law is talking about the father is the head of the house, but she's the neck that turns the head.
Yes. Yes, there is that.
This background kind of influence that's very true.
Yeah, there is definitely that.
It would be fantastic for Australia if people such as yourself who disagree with perhaps the orthodoxy could be attributed good motives. Even if you end up with disagreement between the left and the right, the bleeding hearts and the actually trying to help people rise above their circumstances, if you could at least be given the credit for trying to help and not hate. Yes. And it's like, actually, I'm just like, to me, the most hateful thing would be indifference.
Yeah.
Who do you trust to tell you when you've got something in your teeth?
Yes.
It's not a stranger. A stranger will be indifferent.
Exactly.
But someone who cares about you will say,
pull you up.
You need to fix it.
It's called tough love, isn't it? I mean, that's what...
That's right.
That's what, you know, that's what the world, once upon a time, you know, we lived by that. We lived by the fact that you were honest. And because otherwise there's no room for improvement. It's if we just accept this kind of level of, oh no, that's just how things are and let's not rock any boats here, well then there's not going to be any form of positive growth.
It's so deeply hypocritical and ironic for people who like to call themselves progressive to be so completely opposed to any culture progressing.
Yes.
It's like, we can't get better?
Yes.
We can't, like, the conservative approach says we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We want to keep the things that work, but be honest about the things that don't and fix them incrementally, gradually, and very deliberately.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, it is ridiculous that, you know, there's this notion, you know, and it's just this lack of understanding of traditional culture, this romanticism of Aboriginal culture, and like this, it's always argued that, well, we share, we're not like stingy white people who keep all the wealth for ourselves. We share amongst our own people. Well, yes, we did so once upon a time, and it worked really, really well in living in small family groups, dotted around the country. You were ensuring everyone's survival, but now it is actually having a detrimental effect on Aboriginal people in remote communities. When you've, particularly so that there's so much substance abuse and alcohol abuse in communities, Aboriginal people will literally feel sick to have to say no to family. So they will just say yes, which means basically their income is shared amongst family. And when you've got so many family members who are alcoholics, who are gamblers, and all those sorts of things, and very large families who will take advantage, use the excuse of culture that, well, you have to give to me because I'm your auntie or I'm your uncle or whatever it is. They're abusing that culture in that aspect to fund their own addictions, and it's turning culture on its head. So let's stop romanticising and let's start being realistic about what is going on and how culture is having a detrimental effect. We've always looked externally toward why Aboriginal people are down here. We need to start looking inside now.